In June 29, 2017, the former Vice President of Nigeria, Professor Onabanjo, who served briefly as acting president at that time, signed an executive order number 004 for the implementation of the Voluntary Assets and Income Declaration Scheme. The tax amnesty scheme offered a time-limited opportunity for taxpayers to regularize their taxes status relating to previous tax periods and pay the taxes due with certain benefits. The amnesty was to last for 9 months. According to reports, the Bola Tinubu-led administration is planning to reintroduce the National Tax Amnesty Scheme. A committee is in place, but will that optimize tax collection in a largely informal sector? That is a big question we hope to find answer to this morning on the show. And to talk to us, I have Ayodele Akinsuyite, Associate Director, Tax and Regulatory Service, PwC, Nigeria. Mr. Ayodele, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. Good morning, viewers. Thank you for having me.
Okay, now at the inception of this administration, the real talk was about tax harmonization to eliminate multiple taxation and to also cushion the effect of fuel subsidy removal. Now, is this still on course with the introduction of this particular national tax amnesty scheme?
Yeah, I believe so. As we are aware, the president inaugurated a presidential committee on fiscal policy and tax reforms recently. And part of the key deliverable of that committee, of course, there are a couple of them, is to optimize taxes, right? To harmonize tax revenue. Of course, having multiple taxes at different levels is not an optimal process from an economic point of view. Just putting additional burden on businesses, with the level of economic activities we have in country. So having an harmonized revenue collection function, having an harmonized set of taxes, to eliminate or at least significantly reduce multiple taxes, I think is a welcome development, and some of the other deliverables of that committee also includes a revised national tax policy. So we have a national tax policy, but that committee is then going to have another look at that and then provide a revised document that is more relevant to today's reality. Look at the national fiscal framework, then put together a couple of bills, right? Taxes is a function of the law, so if there are areas where we need to strengthen the position of the law, we need to make amendments, so the committee would also look into that area. The revenue will also work on revenue optimization, right? This government have made it clear that taxes is going to be one of the major sources of revenue, to drive development, and then put in place some model templates for subnationals, the state and local governments, to adopt. And of course, the tax amnesty that you did mention. So the fact that the tax amnesty is coming into the conversation is not an indication that government is moving away from that core mandate, or objective of harmonizing taxes. Multiple taxes does not really help anybody in terms of the overall government revenue. We feel that the numbers did not support the continued, existence of multiple taxes compared with other jurisdictions that have fewer taxes, but there seems to be even generating more revenue, right? So if those multiple taxes are now serving as hindrance, as bottleneck to development, to profitability of business, to sustenance of business enterprises, to making companies to exit Nigeria or make Nigeria less competitive. I'm sure you've looked at the ranking of Nigeria in the list of ease of doing business and paying taxes and all that. Seems to have just so many taxes, and the cost of compliance, of course, will be quite significant.
Well, Mr. Ayodele, let's wind back a bit and look at when it first came into place. That was when the country's former vice president, Yemi Osinbajo, implemented it in 2017. It actually lapsed in about 9 months, ended March 2018. So as at that time, did it achieve its intended purpose? Did the taxpayers take advantage of it? And was that actually the basis for the current administration wanting to reintroduce it?
I think broadly, the fact that it's coming back now might be an indication that maybe all the objectives that were set up then, in 2017 when these was, introduced was probably not achieved. What are those objectives? Maybe it's a good idea to just have a look at those objectives again, very briefly. Some of the key objectives are basically around conversation with respect to Nigeria's tax to GDP ratio, right? The objective was to increase that from about 6% then to about 15% by 2020. Today we're in 2023. As at the end of 2022, we understand that the tax to GDP ratio, even though it has increased from 6%, but we didn't achieve the 15% target. It was just marginally above 10%. Okay. Another objective was basically to broaden the federal and state tax brackets. The data that was put out there was that we probably have just about 214 individuals nationwide that pay 20 million or above in taxes annually in Nigeria. So if you split that by the fact that we have almost 30, more than 30 states, how many individuals are paying more than 20 million naira in taxes per state? So, that's really an abysmal number, and I'm not sure that number has changed materially, Another objective was basically to curb non-compliance with existing tax laws and then to discourage tax evasion, use of tax savings and all that. It was also to discourage illicit financial flows and tax evasion. So the question is, these objectives, have they been achieved? So probably that might be the key reason why, this is now being considered again, at this point. And at that time when it was introduced, so was the scope. It was basically meant to cover every individual right. It was to cover all taxes. And it was basically an opportunity for taxpayers who in the past, have not declared, and paid taxes appropriately on their income, on the assets that they own and all that, to take advantage of the opportunity, regularize their position, and then, do the needful. But of course, it doesn't seem as if this approach achieve the desired objective. One of the key items that was supposed to follow was that those that did not take advantage of this opportunity, they were meant to have been investigated. And if they were found to be culpable, they were meant to have been prosecuted. The question is, has that happened? So if there are outstanding taxes that have not been paid, have we identified those that are owing those taxes? Have the appropriate penalties been applied? Have we applied interest? So those are key, indices that we can use to assess whether that program was really effective or not.
So Ayodele, at this time, it would have meant, based on what you said, that it would have made more sense if the government had come out with probably a comprehensive report as regards what was obtainable and what was realizable as regards the 2017 tax amnesty scheme that was implemented by the government at that time. And that could have served as a premise to understanding why it is being reintroduced. But then let's move away from that, Ayodele, and look at the Nigerian markets, like those of other African countries. It is said to be largely dominated by the informal sector, making it hard for a comprehensive database and optimal revenue realization. So, like you have said, there is a new tax policy that is set to come on board. So what kind of tax model templates will be suitable for the country's subnational level and to accommodate this particular informal sector?
Okay, maybe before moving to that question, maybe it's important to just address, your closing remarks or comments with respect to the tax amnesty program. Yeah, I believe as part of this new initiative, possibly, the committee will look at what has been done, will look at what has been achieved, what are the gaps, and then, in reintroducing it, ensure that this now works in an efficient way that delivers the desired outcome. So coming to the question around what do we need to do about the informal sector, I'm sure, very recently, the FIRS, the Federal Inland Revenue Service, put out a statement that it has entered into some kind of partnership or relationship with MATAN. MATAN is Market Traders Association of Nigeria, and it was basically to look at opportunities to bring the informal tax sector into the tax net. I know also one of the key areas that the Tax and Fiscal Reform Committee would also be looking at is in terms of how do we get the informal sector, how do we use data, to drive and improve the administration of taxes in Nigeria. So we clearly need to move away from the standard practice of focusing on only those in the formal sectors, right? Either they are companies or they are individuals. What typically happens is the tax authorities always go after those organizations in the formal sector, would audit them, would look for opportunity to optimize revenue. Of course, that is right. But we also need to pay attention to the informal sector. Why? Because a substantial part of our economy happens within the informal sector. Of course, there has been argument that maybe a lot of the players in the informal sector are not really, the economic activity in that space is relatively small. Of course, that might be right, and I know when we have the right data, we're able to provide buffers, exceptions, and support to those at the lower end of the economic ladder. They are not, empowered financially enough to pay taxes, either because their earnings are really so low, and there are provisions within the tax law to provide exceptions for such individuals or companies. But I can tell you that there are several organizations, there are several individuals that are playing in the informal sector, and the economic activity are quite significant. So the challenge is we need to have a structure, we need to have a template that leverage on data to be able to identify these individuals, to be able to identify these organizations and bring them into the tax net. So in my view, I think that is the appropriate model, that's the appropriate template that I expect we're going to adopt, and I'm quite optimistic, that the reform committee will pay significant attention to this area, and they'll be able to get this category of people into the tax net.
Still talking about the issue of template and structure, some people have said that that is as important as having a workable time frame where you expect such to mature and have everybody brought on board. And just as we know it, National Tax Amnesty is a temporary program that's actually created by government to encourage taxpayers and to settle unpaid taxes. But then you want to also consider how long this scheme should be in place, because if the aim is to accelerate tax payments among Nigerians and, of course, for corporate bodies, one would expect that it should have a time span that is large enough to accommodate as many people, just as you said, having as many people either in the formal or in the informal sector into the tax database in order to improve the tax system and revenue that should come with it. So what's your take?
I totally agree with you. There should be a time frame, and I believe the reform committee will define a time frame. If you look at what we've seen in other parts of the world, on the average, maybe it goes between 6 months to 1 year. You want to give enough time for people that really want to comply, and for whatever reason, either it was an oversight or it was deliberate, to say, okay, I want to take advantage of this opportunity, and then come forward and declare my income and then pay the appropriate taxes. But at the same time, you don't want the time to be so long that it seems as if it's just business as usual, right? And that seems to be the point where we missed it the first time. At least my view is, after the amnesty program was concluded, I'm not sure we were able to demonstrate that capacity to identify those that do not take advantage of that amnesty program, and then comply. Because those that either have been paying their taxes normally or those that took advantage of that opportunity, they will look back and say, hey, what happened to those that did not? So I sincerely hope in defining that time frame, it has to be such that it is long enough for people to take advantage of it, but it is not too long also to give the impression that nothing is going to happen if I don't. Then while that scheme is going on, it is important for the tax authority to develop the capacity at the federal, at the state, at the local government level to be able to identify those that should or that have outstanding taxes but have not taken advantage of this opportunity, and to be able to bring them to book. If we don't do that, then we'll be sending the wrong signal, and that has to be very clear, as we're making this, bringing this scheme on board, that it's not going to be business as usual. If you don't take advantage of this window of opportunity that is provided, government has the capacity, the tax authority have the capacity to identify those that are owing taxes, and they're going to go after them and going to make sure they comply. If there's need for persecution, they will be persecuted. Where penalties and interest apply, they will insist that those penalties and those interests will apply.
Let's now quickly look at what the chairman of the Federal Inland Revenue Service said. That's Mohammed Nami. He said that Nigeria needs tough reforms to increase tax revenue. But then there have been talks on and on about interest waivers, reduction in tax penalties for defaulters, and maybe some other favorable conditions to encourage compliance by taxpayers. So will this particular amnesty assume a carrot and stick approach, or are there some kind of incentives that Nigerians should expect?
In the amnesty program back is clearly some form of program to improve and drive the level of compliance, right? And I think, yes, we may have a carrot and stick approach. The carrot is basically saying, yes, it's possible you have not done what the law requires you to do. Effectively, you have broken the law. But we're saying we're going to grant you amnesty, just like we have with the Niger Delta, amnesty program, and we're saying if you come forward, you will not be persecuted. We will require you to comply with the provisions of the law with respect to your tax circumstance, pay the amount that is outstanding, and then, we'll ask you to go forward from there and sin no more, right? But it is also important that we match this approach with the stick approach, right? To say, if you don't take advantage of this opportunity, then the tax authority first is going to identify you, is going to assess you to the taxes that you have not paid. If there are penalties that are associated with those taxes, it's going to insist that those penalties will apply, and it's going to apply interest on those on those outstanding liabilities. So I totally agree with the carrot and stick approach. The carrot is basically saying we're giving you a window opportunity, regularize your circumstance. But the stick also needs to follow very promptly. And that aligns with our earlier conversation around timing, right? We want the timing to be, long enough for compliance, but at the same time, not too long, such that you have that sense of urgency that, the government, the tax authority really want to go after defaulters and do the needful and apply the appropriate stick, to ensure that, this is not seen as, just business as usual, and to encourage the culture of compliance, with relevant tax laws.
And we also hope that this will help in dealing with issues of tax evasion in the country, most especially for countries that do operate within Nigeria's business space, but then may have their headquarters somewhere in other countries. That's also a major challenge for so many African countries when it comes to tax revenue generation. And we hope that these new tax policies will accommodate all that and deal with it. Ayodele Akinsuyite, Associate Director, Tax and Regulatory Service, PwC Nigeria. Thank you so much for your time on the show.
Thank you for having me, and do enjoy the rest of the day.
And you too. Now, tax managers say the move by the Nigerian government to reintroduce the National Tax Amnesty Scheme demonstrates its commitment to increasing tax compliance, boost revenue, and of course create a more favorable environment for economic growth. However, there will be need for the building of trust, ensuring accountability, and of course transparency in revenue generation and the use of funds, and that can also help the government build trust and ensure that monies realized are being put into the critical sectors that will revamp the economy and make it more buoyant. We're going on a short break now. When we return, we'll bring you international business stories. Don't go away.